Hello, this is Aaron Shoemaker, and I'm here today with Linda Gates, who's the SVMG Director of Corporate Compliance, and we're going to talk about the coding audit process for this year. Linda, can you tell us a little bit about our coding audit process and why we've changed it?
Sure, be happy to. This year is a little more complicated. What we're trying to do is actually follow up in a more timely manner with providers who may need that additional input. So if you didn't do well on the previous year and failed, we provided education and then a re-audit. So that's the first time that's occurred.
Okay.
So we are now distributing results for those re-audits as well as all new providers in 2015. And then Ascension is helping us address providers that are billing outside of what Medicare expects to see. And that's an individualized score per physician, per specialty. So, using that data to help identify problems with outlier providers and their billing patterns before a payer does.
So we're auditing people who failed in 14, new providers, and people who had variance to what expectations would be.
That's correct.
And then tell me how it changed this year, because I know we're not doing just pass-fail like we used to. We've actually taken into account the whole note.
That's true. And one of the things that we learned, and some of the feedback that we've heard from providers along the way is, well, why is this my fault if my staff, for example, charged it under the wrong provider, if they had a wrong data service?
Right.
That's out of my control. And we agree. And with the guidance of the physicians on the CRP committee as well as the quality committee, we tried to design a weighted scoring system that if it was out of the physician's control, then physicians shouldn't be penalized. We can't say it would pass an audit because it really wouldn't. But for the purposes of determining a pass-fail rate, if it's an administrative error, is what we chose to call those are not counted against the providers. And then we also wanted to take into consideration there's a difference between being one review a system short of comprehensive and being short your review a system and your family history and your exam and your medical decision. Those are different errors, so they'll be weighted differently. And in this audit process, for the purposes of being considered a failing audit, it is based on those weighted scores instead. So that's new.
So it's a much more fair process than the previous pass-fail.
I think so.
What happens if you fail?
We're going to provide education. We need to show for not only the protection of the individual physicians, but for Ascension and St. Vincent's Medical Group as well. If we document a failing rate, and then we don't bother to check again, we don't do anything about it, and then we document another failing rate, that leaves that provider at individual increased risk as well as us as an organization. So once we have a failing rate, we need to document a corrective action, which is going to consist of education and then a follow-up audit post-education, so that we can then see that, yes, their learning has occurred.
And how many opportunities of education do they get if they have a problem?
That's a good question. We were challenged on our committees as coming from the St. Vincent's Health Board to come up with a more progressive corrective action. So a provider will have their initial audit. If they fail, they would then receive education, and they would be audited again. And if they fail that audit, that's considered now their first occurrence, which then they'll have education and re-audit. And if you pass, then you just go back to the cycle. If you fail, well, now you're going to move on down the line to the second occurrence. So it does progress, but you kind of get two swings followed by education both times.
Right, and I think the purpose has really been to make it an educational format that's not meant to be punitive, as long as we're working towards resolution of any shortcomings. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think we're trying to help those providers as well as our organization itself, and making sure that we know that these are complex issues. We know that for the last couple of years we were also learning a new system, and I think we're trying to get to the point that everyone feels more comfortable with selecting that level of service with confidence.
Great. Well, thank you.
You bet.
So today we want you to understand that we've changed the audit process. It's no longer a pass-fail, and it's more of a weighted and balanced score that really looks at your overall note, tries to get away and understand a simple error versus a really significant error. And we want you to understand that we're working towards a process to help you do the best you can at coding, and have it be an educational process and really something that builds upon our practice and helps us practice in a better way. There'll be multiple points of education for any failures, and you should work with your leaders to get there if you have any concerns. Lastly, I want to mention February was the highest encounter number that St. Vincent Medical Group has ever had, and it was in a short month. So we're growing, we're moving in a good direction, and I wanted to congratulate everyone on that. Thank you.
Thanks.